At 58, the tragedy of Jason Statham is beyond heartbreaking. Jason Statham didn't arrive in Hollywood on a red carpet. He crawled out of the cold. From coal-stained Shirebrook to the roar of billion-dollar franchises, he built a legend with nothing but bruises, breath, and a promise to himself. Keep moving or freeze where you stand. Before the suits and studio lights, he hawked cheap perfume to strangers who wouldn't meet his eyes. Before the cameras, there were concrete pools and winter water so cold it taught him how pain thinks. He wasn't trained to pose, he was trained to endure. A diver too late for destiny, he missed the Olympic dream by a heartbeat and learned the cruel physics of life. Effort isn't always rewarded, but endurance becomes character. That endurance turned into cinema, not the safe kind, the blood-priced kind. Statham refused doubles, slid across hoods, dove through glass, and fought on moving steel because he believed the audience could smell a lie. He gave them truth. It cost him pieces of himself. Then came the moments that should have ended him. A 3-ton truck, failed brakes, and a plunge into the Black Sea, a stunt morphing into a eulogy in real time. He tore the door loose underwater and clawed upward through dark and pressure until the horizon split and air burst into his lungs like fire. Later, he would call it what it was. Not a stunt, a debt. He has carried other debts too. The fracture you don't heal from when a young stuntman doesn't make it home, the quiet grief of a brotherhood that loses one of its brightest, and the haunting emptiness that followed Paul Walker's final goodbye when engines kept roaring on set, but every acceleration echoed absence. He is 58 now. The hair is silvered, the eyes steadier, the body mapped with old wars. The myth says he's indestructible. The man knows better. Steel bleeds, it just doesn't whine. And yet, the darkest turn in Jason Statham's story wasn't the one that almost took his life. It was the years that tried to take his heart. Jason Statham is the rare paradox of modern cinema. A 21st century action giant forged in 20th century grit. While franchises ballooned on green screens and invincible pixels, he kept choosing bone, breath, and gravity. From Shirebrook, Derbyshire, where the air smelled of coal and rain, to London's hustling markets and chlorine-cold pools, he learned early that glamour is a costume worn over bruises. The mythology people love to recite street seller, late-blooming diver, discovered by Guy Ritchie. Instant cult icon sounds neat only because it skips the part where failure lingers and rent is due. His arrival in pop culture felt like a correction. In Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, he didn't act tough. He was composed like a coiled spring, all economy, no wasted motion. The silence of a man who already knows how pain argues. Then came The Transporter, Crank, The Bank Job, The Expendables, Fast and Furious, The Meg, a road carved across 2 decades where he made a simple, old-world promise to audiences. What you're seeing is really happening. He'd rather risk a rib than cheat a frame. Not because of macho posturing, but because honesty became the only currency he trusted after a youth spent selling things people didn't believe in. The culture crowned him the last of the real action heroes, but crowns sit heavy. The job description he wrote for himself, do it for real, demands a price that accountants can't itemize. There's the public ledger, box office billions, global name recognition, the internet's favorite glare, and the private one. Ligaments that hum at night, a left shoulder that clicks, a spine that remembers stairs. It's the quiet calculus of impact and recovery, the way he measures scripts in falls and weeks of ice baths. Yet the man and the myth diverge in one crucial way. Fans see an indestructible force. Colleagues talk about discipline, care, and precision. Statham builds set families, stunt teams he trains with personally, coordinators he trusts, rituals that honor those who risk everything for a shot that lasts 3 seconds on screen. After tragedies within the stunt community and the loss that shadowed Furious 7, his respect hardened into something almost sacred. He understood what many never do. Every explosion ends in silence, and in that silence you count who made it back. Off camera, the edges soften. With Rosie Huntington-Whiteley and their children, London replaces Los Angeles as the center of gravity. Mornings smell like pancakes instead of petrol. Purpose shifts from premieres to presence. He still trains daily boxing, calisthenics, swimming not for a role but for balance. The diet is spare, the routine monastic, not as a brand but as insurance against the rust of stillness. He likes engines but worships reliability. He can talk about Ferraris, then fixate on a perfectly brewed tea. The contradiction is the point, a life scaled down so the meaningful parts can ring louder. What makes his story tragic isn't defeat, it's the relentless exchange success demands. Statham won the fight to become a legend. The legend then tried to own the man. In the public imagination, he has punchlines and power. In private, he carries memory, risk, and the impossible math of time, missed with those he loves. The industry keeps asking for bigger flames. He keeps trying to walk away without smelling of smoke. There's a line he once delivered with a crooked grin that fans repeat as a meme. I used to fight villains, now I fight gravity. It lands because it's funny and lands harder because it's true. The enemy now is attrition, the slow-motion collapse of a body that has already been faithful beyond reason. Most careers ride a wave and recede. His has been a tide. Returning, receding, returning again, less noisy, more inevitable. So here he stands at 58, silver at the temples, fire behind the eyes, a ledger written in scars and second chances. He didn't out-talk Hollywood, he outlasted it. And yet, the questions that made him the ones from the coal town, the pool deck, the London market still whisper at the edges. How much more do you pay for truth? And when does endurance stop being a virtue and start being a wound? Because the winding road from Shirebrook to stardom wasn't just paved with breaks and bruises, it hid the first fracture that would shadow everything to come. In Shirebrook, Derbyshire, the streets were wet with rain and survival. Jason Statham didn't grow up around glamour. He grew up around grind. The town was a small industrial pocket of England, a place that smelled of coal smoke, wet concrete, and quiet dreams. His family lived in a modest home where warmth wasn't guaranteed, but work was. His father, Barry Statham, worked whatever jobs he could find: house painter, coal miner, street vendor, even singer in a pub band. His mother, Eileen Yates, a former dancer, carried grace that never quite left her, even as her feet ached from double shifts. Together, they built a life made of resourcefulness, humor, and sheer persistence. Jason once said, "We didn't have much, but we had hustle." And that's exactly what defined his childhood. He and his older brother, Lee, followed their father to markets, where Barry sold cheap jewelry and perfume goods of questionable quality, but presented with charisma that could almost make them sparkle. The lesson was simple. If the world won't give you a chance, sell one to yourself. Young Jason learned how to read faces, how to negotiate with strangers, how to stand his ground even when standing meant cold pavement under worn-out shoes. There was a quiet rhythm to those early years. Mornings began with the sound of Barry's old van coughing to life. Nights ended with Eileen's soft humming as she cooked whatever they could afford. The television was small, the world smaller, but there was movement, always movement. His father was a man who couldn't sit still, and Jason inherited that restlessness. Even then, stillness felt dangerous, like a trap. He wasn't a golden child. He was the boy who tested limits, curious, agile, always in motion. He climbed roofs, dove into rivers, chased footballs until dusk. What no one saw was how physicality became his language, a way to translate frustration into energy. If life demanded toughness before tenderness, motion became survival. When he was 12, he discovered diving not by plan, but by chance. A local coach spotted him doing flips off a low bridge into a river and urged him to try real training at Crystal Palace National Sports Centre in London. The commute was long, the costs high, but Jason didn't flinch. He had found something pure, an arena where control, focus, and courage met midair. While other kids spent weekends exploring adolescence, Jason spent his at the edge of a 10-meter board, lungs burning, body trembling, learning how to fall without fear. He started late. In diving, most champions begin at 5. Jason started at 12. It should have disqualified him, but he didn't care. His body was his rebellion. He trained until the pool closed, stayed after lights went out, counting every bruise as tuition. Coaches said he had power, but more importantly, he had persistence. When he missed a dive, he climbed back up. Again, again. The sound of his body hitting water echoed like applause from a world that hadn't yet noticed him. By the late 1980 seconds, he was representing Britain's national diving team, competing internationally. His physique, compact, controlled, built for tension, made him one of the team's most consistent performers. In 1990, he competed in the Commonwealth Games, diving from 10 meters into silence and spotlight. For a fleeting second, it seemed the boy from Shirebrook might land among the greats, but sport, like fate, has little mercy. 2 years later, he narrowly missed a spot on the British Olympic team. One place away, a single digit between dream and dismissal. He didn't break down. He froze, watching ripples disappear. I remember just staring at the water, he later said. It looked calm, too calm, like it didn't care. That stillness became a scar. All the years of discipline, thousands of dives, countless bruises sank beneath that surface. The pool had taught him everything about control, only to remind him that control doesn't guarantee reward. That moment changed him. It didn't end his drive. It rewired it. He left the diving boards with something stronger than victory resilience, the kind that doesn't glitter but endures. He learned that life doesn't always give applause. Sometimes it gives silence. And silence, if you listen closely enough, becomes instruction. Without the structure of competitive sport, Jason drifted for a time. He worked odd jobs, sold goods on the street, helped his father on market days. He became one of those faces, calling out from behind stalls in London, peddling perfumes, watches, small luxuries for people who wanted to believe in better days. I wasn't proud of it, he admitted later. But I wasn't ashamed either. I was learning how to survive. That street life was its own kind of education. He learned how people move when they lie, how desperation hides behind smiles, how persistence outlasts pity. These were lessons that no academy teaches, and later, when cameras found him, they were the truths that audiences recognized instantly. His on-screen authenticity wasn't an act, it was muscle memory. Behind the laughter and resilience, though, was a constant undertow of doubt. The ghost of the missed Olympic dream whispered, "Maybe you weren't meant to fly." So he stopped trying to rise and started learning how to land. He took hits, literally and metaphorically, with the same grace he'd once taken dives. It's no coincidence that when the world finally saw him in lock, stock, and two smoking barrels, what they saw was a man who'd already fallen from something and survived. In Shirebrook, the neighbors might have said he'd been lucky, but luck isn't what carried him. It was repetition, discipline, and the quiet refusal to quit. The boy who once dove into icy water became the man who dove headfirst into life. No safety net, no backup plan. And though the surface looked calm, deep down he was still that child of coal and wind, chasing motion so he wouldn't drown in stillness. But the streets of London were waiting, and the next chapter of his life would strip away whatever innocence was left. London in the early 1990 seconds was a city of contradictions. Neon and poverty, opportunity and indifference. For Jason Statham, it was less a home than a test. He had walked away from diving with a body built for flight, but a life stuck on the ground. There were no sponsors, no fallback, just hunger. And hunger, as he once said, keeps you honest. He hustled through the markets, selling cheap perfume and jewelry on street corners where rain turned everything gray. His father had taught him how to hold eye contact just long enough to sell a dream, and that skill became his only currency. Days blurred into nights under flickering street lamps. The soundtrack of survival was the clink of coins in a tin can. Sometimes, when the market closed and he counted barely enough for dinner, he'd laugh to himself, not from joy, but disbelief that he was still standing. He wasn't ashamed of it. "I sold what I had because I refused to steal what I didn't," he'd later say. That line, simple, brutal, true, summed up everything about him. Beneath the streetlight glare, he learned what the world truly valued. Not effort, not honesty, but persistence. People didn't always buy his perfume, but they noticed his eyes steady, alert, unafraid. That's what caught the attention of sports promotions, a modeling agency looking for athletes with grit instead of polish. They didn't want beauty, they wanted realism. Jason fit the brief. His face wasn't pretty, it was lived in, a map of struggle and refusal. He started getting calls for photo shoots. Tommy Hilfiger, Levi's, French Connection. The pay was barely enough to live on, but after years of uncertainty, it was something. "I didn't know if it was luck or punishment," he joked later. Standing still in front of a camera was harder than diving off a board. Still, modeling gave him what the streets never could: visibility. And visibility, even in small doses, invites fate. One of the photographers who worked with him happened to be connected to a young director named Guy Ritchie, who was then casting his first film, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. Ritchie wanted authenticity, not trained actors pretending to be rough. When he met Jason, he didn't see an audition. He saw the real thing. Jason didn't perform a monologue. He told stories the kind you only know if you've lived them. He talked about bargaining with drunks, dodging police for selling without a permit, fighting boredom more than danger. Richie sat there quietly, listening. Then he said, "You don't have to act, you've already lived it." That sentence was his first real script. The role paid £5,000, not much, but more than he'd ever held at once. The film, shot on a shoestring budget, would become one of the most influential British movies of the decade. Jason's naturalism, his pauses, his dry wit, his physical stillness made him magnetic. The boy who once sold fake watches on the street was suddenly selling something far rarer: truth. When Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels premiered in 1998, audiences didn't know who Jason Statham was, but they couldn't look away. His performance wasn't polished. It was raw, charming, and grounded in survival. Critics called him a revelation. Within 2 years, he was back with Richie again in Snatch, standing shoulder to shoulder with Brad Pitt and Benicio del Toro. This time, the hustler from Shirebrook wasn't pretending. He was narrating chaos, commanding the screen with quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly how chaos feels. Snatch grossed over $80 million worldwide and made Jason a name to remember. But fame, when it finally arrived, didn't feel like fortune. It felt like pressure. Richie wanted him for more projects. Hollywood began circling. Suddenly, the man who once slept in freezing flats was sitting in meetings with producers offering him roles in big-budget action films. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent half his life trying to get noticed, and now strangers were fighting over who could pay him to get punched on screen. His next transformation came with The Transporter, 2002. The film defined his career and nearly destroyed his body. It required months of intense martial arts training, Wing Chun, Krav Maga, kickboxing, and he insisted on doing nearly every stunt himself. When asked why, he said, "If I get hurt, at least it's honest." He got hurt a lot. Torn ligaments, fractured ribs, a shoulder that still clicks when he moves too fast. Every frame in that movie was a receipt written in bruises. But the gamble worked. The Transporter wasn't just a hit, it turned Jason into an international phenomenon. He wasn't another Hollywood pretty face. He was a throwback to the old era of physical stars, men who risked everything for realism. Audiences believed him because he didn't need to pretend. He became a symbol of the working-class hero, the man who rose through muscle and willpower rather than charm or connections. Between 2002 and 2010, his rise was relentless. Crank, The Bank Job, Death Race, The Expendables, each film built on the myth that Jason Statham couldn't be broken. Behind the scenes, though, he was paying in quiet currency: pain. Every stunt demanded weeks of training. Every shoot left him sleepless. By his mid-40 seconds, he was already living with the kind of chronic injuries that make most athletes retire. But actors don't retire from pain, they just work around it. He laughed off the exhaustion. "You wake up bruised, go to sleep broken, and do it again the next day," he said. "That's the job." But the truth beneath the humor was darker. The body remembers everything: the falls, the impacts, the moments where air refuses to return. He would ice his joints at night, alone in quiet hotel rooms. The applause long gone, the silence returning. The stillness he'd once feared had followed him again. Still, he refused to yield. Failure wasn't frightening, stopping was. The streets of Shirebrook had taught him that movement itself was survival. So he kept moving, even when the cost rose higher with every film. By the time he joined Fast and Furious and The Expendables, Jason wasn't just acting. He was representing a dying breed, the last of the tangible heroes in a digital age. The boy who once sold trinkets in the rain had become Hollywood's most bankable storm. But behind every explosion, there was still that old silence, the one that began the day he missed the Olympics. The silence that no amount of noise could drown. And it was in that silence that his first real tragedy would return, not on a film set, but in the fragile space between fame and loneliness. Because success doesn't save you from heartbreak, it just gives you better lighting when it happens. By the mid-2000s, Jason Statham had become the definition of modern-day masculinity on screen. Sharp suit, harder jaw, moral compass set somewhere between vengeance and survival. Every director wanted him. Every studio needed him. His name alone could greenlight a film. But behind that unstoppable momentum was a man beginning to fracture under his own myth. From 2002 to 2010, He filmed at a punishing rhythm 2 movies a year, sometimes 3. The Transporter sequels, Crank, Revolver, War, Death Race, The Bank Job, and The Expendables, pushed him to his physical and emotional limits. Each production demanded something new from his body: a higher fall, a harder punch, a longer underwater sequence. And he gave it. Because Jason didn't just play fighters, he was one. He once told Men's Health, "I'm not in competition with anyone else. I'm in competition with fatigue." It wasn't bravado. It was confession. He trained between shoots, refused doubles, and accepted injuries as a kind of tax for authenticity. If a rib cracked, he taped it. If a shoulder popped, he reset it. The audience saw perfection. What the mirror saw was a body built on scar tissue. The critics who had dismissed him as another action archetype began to change their tone. The Bank Job, 2008, was the turning point. A heist film that traded explosions for intelligence. It showed a different Jason, disciplined, deliberate, intense, without theatrics. The film grossed $66 million worldwide and re-established him as something Hollywood rarely celebrates: an action star with restraint. "He doesn't wink at the camera," one critic wrote. "He glares straight through it." But Hollywood's affection is fickle. When Revolver, 2005, flopped, so did his reputation for a moment. The partnership with Guy Ritchie, the director who had discovered him, strained under the weight of failure. Ritchie's philosophical experiment tanked at the box office, and critics labeled it pretentious nonsense. Jason didn't argue. He simply said, "Not every punch lands." Still, the distance between mentor and muse grew, a quiet heartbreak hidden behind polite interviews. He found refuge in work. Crank 2006 pushed him into cult status, a film so chaotic it felt like a dare. "Adrenaline became his oxygen," wrote Empire. The sequel, even crazier, cemented his image as the man who could survive anything. And perhaps that was the problem. The more indestructible his characters became, the less room there was for the man beneath them. Then came The Expendables, 2010, standing shoulder to shoulder with Sylvester Stallone, Jet Li, Dolph Lundgren, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Jason wasn't the kid anymore, he was the equal. The camaraderie on set felt almost mythic. Old-school warriors from different eras colliding in one film. When Stallone was asked who could carry the torch after their generation faded, he answered instantly, "Jason, he's the last of us." That same year, another universe called Fast and Furious. His arrival as Deckard Shaw turned an aging franchise into an event again. He wasn't just a villain, he was gravity calm, ruthless, efficient. His duel with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in Furious 7 became legend. The film earned over $1.5 billion globally, propelling Jason from respected star to immortal brand. Yet, success has its own kind of loneliness. The world saw adrenaline. He felt attrition. The lights got brighter, the nights quieter. He'd wake in hotel rooms unsure which country he was in, muscles aching from endless choreography, the phone buzzing with new offers. "It's funny," he told a friend. "When I had nothing, I wanted more. Now that I have everything, I just want a day off." There's Enraphaty. But days off never came. Instead came The Mechanic, Parker, Safe, Homefront, each demanding more intensity, more spectacle, more Jason. He joked that he'd become a professional fall guy with a day rate. Yet he also began to sense a creative ceiling closing in. Studios didn't want evolution, they wanted repetition. He could feel it when they sent scripts with the same tagline, "Tough guy with a code." When asked about joining the Marvel Universe, he smirked. "I could put my grandma in a cape and she could do it." The quote went viral, but few caught the melancholy behind it. He didn't want capes or green screens. He wanted stakes, real danger, real bruises, real craft. Hollywood, in its obsession with immortality, had forgotten how mortality feels. Jason hadn't. Still, he couldn't deny what he'd built: a career of rare integrity, every success earned through stubbornness rather than hype. His fan base wasn't fickle. It was loyal, generational. Fathers and sons watched him together. He had become the embodiment of endurance, a man audiences believed could take any hit life through. The irony was that life kept throwing them. In 2011, during the filming of The Expendables 2 Inches Bulgaria, a stunt truck's brakes failed. The vehicle plunged off a pier into the Black Sea. Jason, behind the wheel, was trapped underwater inside a 3-ton cage of metal. For long seconds, he couldn't breathe. He broke the door with his shoulder and surfaced alive. Stallone later said, "If it was anyone else, they'd be dead." Jason called it a wake-up call. What he didn't say was that something inside him shifted forever. After that, he performed stunts not out of thrill, but out of tribute to the men who hadn't come back from theirs. Fame reached its apex with The Meg 2018, a film that grossed $527 million and gave him a new generation of fans. But even that triumph carried fatigue. "You do one thing too well," he said, "and they never let you do anything else." He wanted smaller scripts, quieter ones. Hollywood offered bigger explosions. So he began retreating, slowly. The Beverly Hills mansion, the Malibu surf house, the London return, they weren't indulgence. They were escape routes. He was learning to live in reverse, rewinding from the noise towards silence again. What made Jason Statham's peak extraordinary wasn't the money or the movies. It was the paradox that while the world believed he was invincible, he was learning vulnerability for the first time. Every scar was now a sentence in a longer confession, the price of being both legend and man. His name shone on posters across continents, but in his own words, "The louder the applause gets, the harder it is to hear yourself think." Thanks for watching. In Not Bad. And that silence, that subtle hum between success and solitude, was where the real story began. The tragedies that fame couldn't protect him from, and the ghosts that fame itself created. Because beyond the flashing lights and billion-dollar box offices lay the chapters that hurt the most, the ones written in loss, guilt, and memory. Every hero's myth eventually collides with reality. For Jason Statham, that collision was literal. It began in 2011, on the sun-bleached coast of Bulgaria, where the Expendables 2 was filming. The air smelled of fuel and salt. The script called for a chase scene near the pier, a routine sequence for an actor who'd made a career of cheating death. But this time, death didn't wait for a cue. Jason climbed into a 3-ton stunt truck. He was supposed to drive toward the pier, brake hard, stop inches from the edge. Simple, safe, until the brakes failed. In an instant, motion became chaos. The truck screeched, steel shrieking against asphalt, the pier rushing closer. Crew members shouted. Stallone sprinted forward, and Jason's knuckles went white around the wheel. Then the sound that never leaves you. Metal tearing, wood snapping, water swallowing. The vehicle plunged into the Black Sea. Underwater, time dissolved. Darkness pressed against the windows. The seatbelt locked tight. He tried the door. Stuck. His lungs screamed. For a moment, the invincible man felt the same panic he'd spent a lifetime outrunning. Then instinct took over. One shoulder slammed the door again and again until it cracked open. He kicked, fought, clawed toward the faint shimmer above. When he broke the surface, he gasped so hard it sounded like defiance. The crew rushed in. Stallone, wide-eyed, called it a miracle. Jason said nothing. He just stood there, shaking, soaked, staring at the black water that had nearly claimed him. That night, he told no one what he felt. But something inside him had changed. He began calling stunts risks paid in blood. The industry labeled it professionalism. His friends knew it was penance. 2 years later, fate tested him again. In 2013, while shooting Fast and Furious 7, Jason found a new kind of brotherhood, a cast bound not just by fame but by family. The heart of that family was Paul Walker. He wasn't just another co-star. He was warmth incarnate, a man who believed kindness could coexist with speed. Paul welcomed Jason instantly, calling him one of us after their first table read. On set, they traded jokes and coffee, sharing long talks after the cameras stopped rolling, about cars, faith, and the fragile nature of time. Then came the 30th of November 2013, a Saturday. Jason was in a training session when his phone lit up with messages. At first, he didn't understand. Then he saw the headline, "Paul Walker dies in car accident." He froze. It couldn't be Paul, he whispered. He drove like he breathed. But it was true. Paul wasn't behind the wheel that day, his friend was. The car, a Porsche Carrera GT, hit a light pole at 90 miles per hour. Both gone. In seconds. Jason flew quietly to the memorial, unannounced. He stood behind the crowds, no sunglasses, no cameras, just a man mourning another who had believed in him. When reporters asked later, he said, "The world lost a star, but we lost a brother." Filming Furious 7 after that became an act of endurance. Every revving engine, every line of dialogue echoed with Paul's absence. Jason said it felt like chasing a ghost. When he finally watched the completed movie, he didn't see a blockbuster. He saw reminders of conversations that would never happen again. He carried that loss into every role that followed. On set, before each take, he began closing his eyes briefly. Not superstition, but ritual. A moment of silence for the ones who never came back. The stunt teams noticed but never asked. They knew. In an industry obsessed with spectacle, Jason's silence became a form of prayer. Yet the universe wasn't done testing him. The accident in Bulgaria had broken something in his body. Paul's death had fractured something in his spirit. Together they turned him cautious, not afraid, but aware. He began demanding stricter safety protocols, personally inspecting rigs, double-checking cables. He wasn't just protecting himself anymore. He was protecting every nameless stunt performer, risking it all for 3 seconds of glory. They deserve to go home after the shot, he said. Not everyone does. Still the ghost lingered. He dreamed of water, of headlights cutting through smoke, of laughter swallowed by silence. He'd wake in the dark, breath shallow, eyes searching for the familiar glow of home. Sometimes he'd walk down the hallway just to watch his children breathe, as if verifying that life was still there, real and waiting. Fame had once been fuel. Now it felt like noise. He turned down interviews, retreated from publicity, and avoided the word fear. Instead, he called it respect. Respect for life, for chance, for the thin thread that separates performance from tragedy. The public never saw the toll. They saw the Meg, Hobbs and Shaw, billion-dollar hits, invincible smiles. But behind that steady gaze lived a man haunted by moments. No camera would ever capture the smell of gasoline before an explosion, the taste of salt water in his lungs, the echo of a friend's laugh frozen in time. In 2020, when the world went silent, Jason found an unexpected relief. For once, the machine stopped. No engines, no explosions. Just family, quiet, and air that didn't smell of smoke. He told Esquire, "It's strange when the world pauses and you realize you've been running for 20 years without breathing." But even peace came with anxiety. The body doesn't forget its training, and neither does the mind. He'd pace at night, restless, replaying scenes, checking doors, listening for sounds that weren't there. Rosie called it the leftover motion. Maybe she was right. Maybe after a lifetime of running, stopping felt too much like danger. The mystery of Jason Statham isn't in how he survives danger. It's in why he keeps seeking it. Every crash, every fall, every scar seems to echo that same unspoken question. Who am I when I stop moving? He spent decades proving that strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about breaking, then standing up anyway. But the cracks, those small, invisible ones, tell a quieter truth. The man of steel isn't steel at all. He's something rarer, a survivor who refuses to romanticize pain, who understands that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to face it again tomorrow. Today, at 58, he smiles less for the cameras but laughs more at home. He's seen too much to believe in immortality. The water, the wreck, the ghosts, they follow him still, but now as reminders, not enemies. "Every time I roll the camera," he once said, "I remember the people who trusted me to come back." It's heartbreaking how fate keeps testing those who've already passed its exams. For Jason Statham, tragedy didn't make him weaker, it made him quieter. And in that silence, he found something close to peace. But even peace, as he would learn, never stays long. The years that followed would force him to face a different kind of battle, the one not against gravity or pain, but against time itself. By his 50s, Jason Statham had fought every kind of battle a man could face: poverty, obscurity, pain, loss, and the unforgiving machinery of fame. But the greatest struggle waiting for him wasn't physical at all. It was learning how to live slowly. He once joked that he had spent half my life running from explosions and the other half pretending I wasn't tired. But the truth behind the laugh was sharper. The body that had built his empire had started to whisper warnings. His spine had compressed from years of impact. His joints crackled like old film reels. "Some mornings I can't feel my left shoulder," he told a friend. "It's like part of me is still underwater somewhere." Still, he never quit. His discipline had turned into ritual. Boxing, swimming, yoga, calisthenics, every day began with motion. "If I stop, I rust," he liked to say. His doctors called it obsession. Rosie called it armor. To him, it was survival. At home, the rhythm was different. Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, the model who once seemed like the calm after all his storms, became his quiet revolution. She wasn't dazzled by the fame. She loved the man who still burned eggs and forgot his lines at bedtime stories. They made a life that wasn't about premieres or red carpets. It was about small things, Jack's laughter echoing through the kitchen, Isabella's tiny fingers gripping his thumb, the smell of pancakes on slow mornings in London. Jason called it the peace I never thought I'd earn. Their home reflected that shift. Gone were the glossy walls of Los Angeles. In their place stood the softer hues of Kensington. Light through tall windows, silence between rooms, the distant hum of London beyond the glass. It was the sound of a man learning how to be still. Yet peace was fragile. Work still called, and Hollywood's machine doesn't understand pause. He'd leave for months of filming The Meg 2, Wrath of Man, Operation Fortune, returning to find his children a little older, their voices a little different. He confessed in an interview that missing those moments hurt more than any stunt. "You can heal bones," he said. "You can't relive time." Rosie understood. She left handwritten notes in his suitcase, short, simple things. "Come home safe. We love you." He kept them folded in his wallet, talismans of something purer than applause. On set, the legend persisted. Younger actors looked at him with awe. Stunt performers called him the general. But behind the cool stare and the clenched jaw, there was a gentler man, now a teacher more than a fighter. He mentored his teams, demanded safety above spectacle, and always remembered the names of the crew. "Every movie's a family," he said once. "And if you're lucky, you don't lose anyone this time." He still trained like the young man who never got the Olympic dream, but his focus had shifted inward. He read philosophy, practiced meditation, learned the art of silence. Friends say he had become almost monk-like, no parties, no extravagance, just discipline and gratitude. "He's not trying to prove he's hard anymore," one crew member said. "He's trying to prove he's human. The Selman, a Macdum, is a breedsome." He rarely gives interviews now. When he does, he speaks with that dry humor that hides a lifetime's worth of lessons. "People think I'm fearless," he once told GQ. "I'm not. I'm just not finished yet." In 2025, at 58, Jason Statham stands as one of the last action legends who never cheated his audience. His hair silvered, his gaze softer but unbroken, he is proof that authenticity doesn't age, it hardens into legacy. His fortune is estimated at over $120 million, but wealth has never been the measure of his worth. What defines him now isn't what he's earned, but what he's learned. That family is the only stunt worth risking for. That peace is not found, it's protected. At night, when filming ends and the house sleeps, he sometimes walks through the dark hallways, careful not to wake anyone. He pauses at his children's doors, listening to their steady breathing, and for a moment the man who once survived the Black Sea and the brutality of Hollywood stands utterly still. He doesn't need to run anymore, because the fight, at last, is over. And in its place lives something rarer than fame or fortune, quiet, earned peace. But legacy doesn't rest. It grows in the shadows of memory, waiting to be told by those who come next. And for Jason Statham, his legend was no longer just about what he survived, but what he left behind. Jason Statham's legacy doesn't glitter, it endures. He didn't change cinema through speeches or scandals. He changed it by refusing to fake a punch. In an era when Hollywood heroes were crafted on computers, he kept faith with gravity. Every fall, every hit, every crash reel. That insistence on authenticity reshaped how audiences saw action films. The spectacle became something they could feel in their bones again, the way audiences once did with Steve McQueen, Bruce Lee, or Clint Eastwood. Critics began calling him the last analog hero in a digital world. And that might be the truest summary of his contribution. Jason didn't perform action, he resurrected it. He built a bridge between the brutal realism of 1,970-second cinema and the hyper-engineered blockbusters of today. The man who once sold perfume in a rain-soaked market gave modern filmmaking its scent of sweat and danger back. But beyond the choreography of chaos, there's something quieter that defines his impact on her. He became the archetype of the working-class champion. No nepotism, no polish, no acting school pedigree, just persistence. His story turned into an unwritten script for a generation of dreamers who believed success could be built, not inherited. To millions of fans across the world, mechanics, soldiers, athletes, hustlers, Jason wasn't just entertainment, he was validation. Proof that discipline can rewrite destiny. His influence stretched beyond cinema. His style, the minimalist suits, the shaven head, the effortless menace redefined masculine cool for a new era. Every fashion campaign that wanted authentic grit chased his image. Brands like Audemars Piguet, Jaguar, and Burberry borrowed that aesthetic, elegance born from endurance. He was never theatrical about masculinity. He made it look earned, not advertised. And yet, what truly immortalized him wasn't the films, the style, or even the fame. It was how he treated the people behind the camera. Stunt performers, often invisible to the world, speak of him with reverence. He funds safety initiatives, mentors young coordinators, and quietly donates to the families of fallen crew. He never forgets who bleeds for the frame, said one longtime stunt double. That respect made him a guardian of a craft many others took for granted. In Britain, he became a kind of national paradox. The street vendor who conquered Hollywood, the diver who never made the Olympics but leapt farther than anyone. He carried that working-class defiance wherever he went. Every interview, every red carpet moment, there's no accent softened, no humility rehearsed. He never pretended to belong in Hollywood. He simply made Hollywood adjust its tone around him. And somehow, amid all that toughness, Jason's name came to mean something deeper than invincibility. It came to symbolize endurance with dignity. He wasn't the loudest, flashiest, or most decorated, but he was the most consistent. Every film carried his signature rhythm: precision, honor, restraint. He built a reputation that outlasted franchises. As Sylvester Stallone once said, "Some actors chase fame. Jason chases truth." That truth resonated worldwide. In Asia, where his practical stunts mirrored the old Hong Kong school of action, he's revered like a martial arts purist. In Europe, he's seen as the heir to working-class cinema, the anti-star who became a star. In America, he's the embodiment of reliability. When the credits say Statham, the audience knows what they're paying for, not fantasy, but faith in the real. Even now, younger actors mimic his ethic. They talk about pulling a Statham, doing the stunt yourself, showing up early, never complaining. It's become industry shorthand for professionalism wrapped in humility. Off-screen, his legacy continues to evolve. His quiet philanthropy supports youth sports programs, diving scholarships, and stunt safety foundations, always anonymously. He once told Men's Journal, "Someone gave me a chance when I had none. That's the only debt I'll never pay off." Jason Statham didn't build a dynasty of sequels. He built something rarer, a moral blueprint. Proof that even in an industry obsessed with artifice, truth still has box office value. That scars can outshine CGI. That silence can command a room louder than a speech. His story has become a myth, not of perfection, but of persistence. A reminder that toughness isn't measured in muscle or money, but in how you treat people when no one's filming. So when his fans watch him now, silver hair glinting under studio lights, that same unblinking gaze, they're not just watching an action star. They're witnessing the last torchbearer of a disappearing tradition, the hero who earns every heartbeat of the story. But legends, no matter how fierce, are still human. And Jason's journey, beneath the roar of engines and applause, hides a quieter reflection, one that belongs not to the fighter, but to the man who finally learned to rest. There's a reason Jason Statham's story hits differently. It isn't because of fame or fortune, it's because it's true. Every scar, every broken rib, every fall he took wasn't a special effect. It was his life being written in bruises. In an industry obsessed with illusion, Jason never faked the truth. He earned it. And that, more than box office numbers or celebrity gossip, is what makes him unforgettable. If you look at his career through a moral lens, there's something deeply poetic about it. He came from a world where lies were cheap and effort was expensive, where the only currency that mattered was endurance. Hollywood often rewards the loudest voices, but Jason built his empire in silence. That quiet defiance, refusing to become what the system wanted him to be, was his rebellion. And yet, there's a sadness beneath that stoicism. For all his achievements, Jason Statham's tragedy isn't that he suffered. It's that the world rarely saw the man behind the armor. Fame taught him how to hide. Every role made him stronger, but also more invisible. The public loved the fighter, the anti-hero, the action god, but they rarely noticed the human being still learning how to heal from old wounds. The irony is haunting. The man who made his living jumping off buildings spent decades trying to find solid ground. The man who outdrove time was still haunted by it. Even his love story with Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, beautiful, balanced, sincere, feels like the universe giving him a second chance at stillness after a lifetime of motion. And perhaps that's the deeper truth of Jason Statham's legacy. He didn't just redefine action, he redefined what survival looks like when the fight is over. You can almost see it in his eyes now, the same determination, but slower, wiser, carrying the weight of everything that came before. He's no longer trying to outrun his past. He's learning to coexist with it. We've seen countless stars rise faster, shine brighter, and vanish sooner. But Jason? He's built differently. His fame isn't a flash, it's a forge. He didn't chase relevance. He became timeless by being real. When the world moved toward spectacle, he stayed grounded. When others hid behind digital doubles, he stepped into the fire himself. And that's why, decades from now, when people talk about action cinema's golden era, they won't remember the explosions or the cars. They'll remember him, the man who made them believe that pain could be poetic, that survival could be beautiful, that authenticity could still win. Because the real measure of Jason Statham isn't in the roles he played, but in the rules he refused to break. In a culture that glorifies shortcuts, he took the long road and left it paved for others. His story is more than just one of grit, it's one of grace. And maybe that's what makes it all so haunting. The idea that even the toughest man in Hollywood, the one who fought gravity and time, still carries quiet fears of slowing down, of being forgotten, of rusting when the motion stops. But maybe that's what makes him human, and maybe that's what makes him great. Because Jason Statham isn't just an actor, he's a mirror held up to all of us, the proof that pain can become art, and that resilience, when done right, is the purest kind of beauty. But every story, no matter how triumphant, eventually turns to reflection. And as Jason's legend settles into history, what remains is not the roar of engines, but the echo of a single truth whispered through time. Even steel remembers the heat that forged it. Time moves differently for men like Jason Statham. It doesn't rush, it erodes quietly, persistently, like the tide smoothing a scar on stone. And if you watch him now, you can almost see that rhythm in his eyes. The fire is still there, but the flame burns lower, steadier, as if he's finally learned that survival isn't about outrunning the dark, it's about learning to walk beside it. Some nights he still revisits Shirebrook in memory, the smell of coal smoke, his father's laughter echoing through market stalls, his mother humming by a flickering bulb. He remembers the cold pools where he first learned the discipline of breath, the streets where he learned the cost of pride. The past doesn't haunt him anymore. It teaches him. Every ache in his body is a lesson written in time. Pain fades, but the meaning stays. He's not chasing fame now. He's chasing presence. Morning pancakes with Jack, bedtime stories with Isabella, quiet drives with Rosie, where no one calls him star or legend. In those small, unfilmed moments, Jason has found the one prize Hollywood could never offer: peace that doesn't need applause. And yet, there's something poignant in the silence that follows his laughter. Because a man who has lived this fiercely always knows the balance can shift without warning. One wrong turn, one heartbeat, and the world you built can vanish. That's why he guards his family like a secret. He's learned the price of exposure, the fragility of everything we call permanent. Sometimes, when the house sleeps, he steps onto the porch alone. The London night hums softly, cars in the distance, wind through leaves, the faint whistle of a train. He looks up at the stars, the same ones that watched over him when he was just a boy in Shirebrook dreaming of flight. And maybe, in that stillness, he realizes he did fly after all, just not in the way he expected. His body may carry the weight of decades, but his spirit remains unbroken. Because Jason Statham's story isn't about being indestructible, it's about being undaunted. The boy who dove into cold water and came up gasping is the same man who plunged into fame and somehow surfaced whole. He didn't just survive the industry, he outlasted it without losing himself. And when his time in the spotlight fades, as all spotlights do, his legend will remain not in the flames of his stunts, but in the quiet endurance behind them. The truth that even in the loudest lives, the most powerful moments happen in silence. Some stories end with applause, his ends with peace. Because Jason Statham's greatest performance was never in front of the camera, it was the life he built when the cameras stopped rolling. Some stories were never meant to be known. But now, there's Rafferty. But days off never came. Instead came the mechanic, Parker, safe, Homefront, each demanding more intensity, more spectacle, more Jason. He joked that he'd become a professional fall guy with a day rate. Yet he also began to sense a creative ceiling closing in. Studios didn't want evolution, they wanted repetition. He could feel it when they sent scripts with the same tagline. Tough guy with a code. When asked about joining the Marvel Universe, he smirked. I could put my grandma in a cape and she could do it. The quote went viral, but few caught the melancholy behind it. He didn't want capes or green screens. He wanted stakes, real danger, real bruises, real craft. Hollywood, in its obsession with immortality, had forgotten how mortality feels. Jason hadn't. Still, he couldn't deny what he'd built, a career of rare integrity, every success earned through stubbornness rather than hype. His fan base wasn't fickle. It was loyal, generational. Fathers and sons watched him together. He had become the embodiment of endurance, a man audiences believed could take any hit life through. The irony was that life kept throwing them. In 2011, during the filming of the Expendables 2 inches Bulgaria, a stunt truck's brakes failed. The vehicle plunged off a pier into the Black Sea. Jason, behind the wheel, was trapped underwater inside a 3-ton cage of metal. For long seconds, he couldn't breathe. He broke the door with his shoulder and surfaced alive. Stallone later said, "If it was anyone else, they'd be dead." Jason called it a wake-up call. What he didn't say was that something inside him shifted forever. After that, he performed stunts not out of thrill, but out of tribute to the men who hadn't come back from theirs. Fame reached its apex with The Meg 2018, a film that grossed $527 million and gave him a new generation of fans. But even that triumph carried fatigue. "You do one thing too well," he said, "and they never let you do anything else." He wanted smaller scripts, quieter ones. Hollywood offered bigger explosions. So he began retreating, slowly. The Beverly Hills mansion, the Malibu surf house, the London return, they weren't indulgence. They were escape routes. He was learning to live in reverse, rewinding from the noise towards silence again. What made Jason Statham's peak extraordinary wasn't the money or the movies. It was the paradox that while the world believed he was invincible, he was learning vulnerability for the first time. Every scar was now a sentence in a longer confession, the price of being both legend and man. His name shone on posters across continents, but in his own words, the louder the applause gets, the harder it is to hear yourself think. Thanks for watching. In Not Bad, and that silence, that subtle hum between success and solitude, was where the real story began. The tragedies that fame couldn't protect him from, and the ghosts that fame itself created. Because beyond the flashing lights and billion-dollar box offices lay the chapters that hurt the most, the ones written in loss, guilt, and memory. Every hero's myth eventually collides with reality. For Jason Statham, that collision was literal. It began in 2011, on the sun-bleached coast of Bulgaria, where the Expendables 2 was filming. The air smelled of fuel and salt. The script called for a chase scene near the pier, a routine sequence for an actor who'd made a career of cheating death. But this time, death didn't wait for a cue.